Dungeon Keeper 2 is considered to be the pinnacle of base building genre by many gamers of the 90s. Since then, there have been several games directly trying to imitate the Bullfrog classic. The most direct spiritual successor is the Dungeon series, which spawned 4 titles. Before the first Dungeons title was even released, there was one title that took the genre to a different setting. Evil Genius is a 2004 title developed by Elixir Studios that took the base gameplay of Dungeon Keeper and combined it with an alternative 1960s timeline, spoofing the various James Bond films of the time. Basically, you play as an evil genius and create your own lair to become the greatest evil thing anyone has ever seen. While it wasn't a wildly successful game, it did generate a cult following that eventually resulted in a sequel in 2021. I actually wanted to review the second game, but ultimately felt that it was better to start off with the original. With that said, is the original Evil Genius a maniacally fun time? So when you start the game, you can pick the evil genius you would like to play as. You can pick between Maximilian the Bald One, Alexis the Female One, and Shen Yu the Eastern Wise Man One. Each character also comes with their own personal henchman. This may seem like only a cosmetic choice at first, as all evil geniuses have the same role. However, each character has a passive bonus that you won't find out about until after starting the game. For this playthrough, we will select Shen Yu, who is given the all-time dapper henchman in Lord Kane. You'll then get a cutscene and arrive on your island. From here begins the tutorial missions. Your first task is to begin building your base properly. Building bases is a very simple process, as you select the room you would like to build and then click where you want the parameters to be. Once you set down the room, you can begin to place items within it. Unlike Dungeon Keeper 2, the room won't be built right away, as your minions must first clear the area out and begin constructing the room properly. Items will also need to be purchased and created separately. Overall, it's a very simple process, although it can be a bit tedious waiting for your minions to perform their duties. You don't have much in terms of direct control over your characters. The only 2 characters you have under your control are the Evil Genius and the Henchman. Let's first start off with the Evil Genius. As the head of operations, your presence can help boost the loyalty of your men to prevent them from leaving you. You can also execute one of your minions in order to inspire the men. Unfortunately, the Genius does not have any additional combat skills or any combat skills, meaning that you'll need to rely on others to protect them. Thankfully, henchmen can not only be directly controlled, but also can participate in combat. Henchmen are incredibly versatile, being able to fight off invaders, as well as being able to go on missions around the globe. Henchmen can also gain experience points and level up to learn some active abilities. For Lord Kane, he isn't the strongest of the 3 initial henchmen, although he can definitely throw hands if needed. Due to his background, Lord Kane's abilities are based on manipulating enemies by either forcing them into a panic or convincing one of them to leave the island altogether. Henchmen are very fun to use and discover, although they tend to be a bit unbalanced. So there are quite a few systems to touch upon that are introduced to you on this first island. While I won't go into depth on every feature or mechanic, I'll do my best to cover the general flow of the game. So ultimately, your base serves as a headquarters for your evil operations. Operations happen on the global map where you'll send your minions and henchmen to perform evil deeds. This can include plotting an operation or stealing money for your cash flow. This is the only way to gain money, so you'll definitely want to steal when you can. Completing operations increases your notoriety, which can lead to new operations to be performed, as well as additional henchmen to offer their services. Performing these acts of infamy will also increase heat, which will increase the likelihood and chance of agents landing on your island to attack your base. It's fun at first, but can get quite tedious waiting for your minions to land on a spot in the world and carry out their duties. Minions themselves come in all different shapes and sizes. There are several paths that you can train your minions in once you have a minion of that profession. For example, you can obtain a guard once you capture a police guard and interrogate him with a minion. That minion will then become a guard and can trade other minions to become guards as well. This is a huge part of the game, as you'll need to build a training room and purchase the appropriate training object. Thankfully, salaries and payment are not a thing, so you can have as many high tier minions as possible. However, I would not advise that, as there is a global 100 minion limit and you'll still need your lower level minions to perform the basic needs of constructing your base and other menial tasks. One of the most interesting systems in the game is the way research is conducted. Instead of just picking the next thing to research, your scientists will walk around the base to observe various items. Once these items are observed, you can combine them with a research item to possibly discover a new object, trap, or even a new room type. It feels unique as you are encouraged to deploy a variety of items to your base. Heck, even loot can be observed and used to discover new innovations. The only problem with this comes down to your technicians and scientists taking a long time to observe items. Sometimes you'll have a ton of research, while other times you're just waiting for a new item to experiment on. While there is a lot to like here, there are a few systems that needed a bit of rework. Along with the practical items you can build for your minions, traps can also be implemented as well. These traps can be triggered by enemies, which can lead to a variety of things. For one, you can have an enemy agent trigger a pressure pad that activates a wind turbine. That wind turbine then pushes them onto another pressure plate, which activates a gas trap. It sounds great to pull this off, although most of the time your traps will end up killing your own minions accidentally. To be fair, I'll chalk some of this up to my user error on my end, although I do wish there was a better way to implement traps. It seems to be a lot of money for very little reward when sending in your hitman to deal with the situation is a much better option. The other one is the form of hotels, which is just one giant waste of money. The idea here is that you build a hotel to distract tourists from learning about your base. In theory, this sounds fine, although having a hotel doesn't necessarily prevent tourists from wandering into your base regardless. It also doesn't help that you don't gain any money from these hotels, despite the fact that they need to be staffed by your valets at all times. The best way I found to deal with them is an old bullet to the brain and dragging their dead bodies into the freezer. This sounds like an Agent 47 mission for some reason, but I digress. For a game that relies so much on your units playing their role, the AI is one of the biggest issues I have. At first, it's not noticeable as you have a small amount of minions and threats to deal with. Unfortunately, this becomes a rather huge issue as more agents begin to attack your base. When you issue any tag or some sort on a character, it can take a while before your minions begin to make their move. It's why I always recommend having at least one henchman at base to be able to immediately respond to threats. If not, good luck on relying on your minions to adequately help you. Sometimes you'll have a group of enemies that you want killed when just one minion decides to rush them head first. The only way to counter the bad minion AI is just to have as many as possible to have at least a higher possibility of dealing with the threats. It's why many of the more combat focused henchmen are so vital to have to help overcome the AI deficiencies. If I have to point to my least favorite element of the game, it is the overpowered super agents. These super agents will arrive at your base once you reach a certain notoriety. At first, it seems like you can just take them out and be done with them. If you do somehow take them down, they will either wake up and continue to wander your island, or leave and reappear at a later point. Unfortunately, super agents can only be permanently removed once you learn of their secret. Worse still, this cannot be done on the first island and is artificially locked until you reach the second island. They even included an overpowered super agent that is not only the best agent in the game, but also does not have any way whatsoever to permanently remove him. You will have to beat the game with him being a menace until the end. Eventually, you'll leave your original island and begin a new base at a second island. Unfortunately, this is when you'll realize just how limited this game really is. The only new thing is the fact that you can finally take out the annoying super agents once and for all, outside of one for a very silly reason. There's just not a lot of new things this game throws at you or does to freshen things up. It's the same formula of plot, steal, commit, axe, repeat. And this finally brings me to one of my biggest gripes I have every time I revisit this game. Regardless of the evil genius or henchman that you select, your missions will be the exact same every single time. There is no skirmish mode at all, let alone a multiplayer mode. This is a huge omission considering that classics like Dungeon Keeper 2 allowed you to battle against the AI along with other humans. This would have opened up the game tremendously and added a whole new competitive element to play around with. I could imagine you and another person building up your bases within opposite ends of an island, sending out your henchmen and task forces to blow up facilities and take out each other's avatar. Heck, you can make it even crazier by playing the forces of justice to attack your opponent's bases and maybe even getting the chance to use a super agent. Before we wrap this up, there are a few miscellaneous things that I wanted to get across. Presentation wise, I really like the late 60s, early 70s vibe that this game has. There are a ton of parodies here, most notably towards the Bond films released around that time. The humor doesn't always land and it feels incredibly dated at certain points, but it works well enough. The audio unfortunately takes down the presentation, especially with the repetitive music. There are only a handful of tracks in this game, so you'll hear the same music over and over again. And just for the record, I did play on my main Windows 11 machine. I didn't have any major game-breaking bugs or major compatibility issues, although I did have a couple of audio glitches here and there. There are fan-made patches out there to address some of these minor issues, but it's not something I find necessary to seek out. Playing the GOG version, it worked right out of the box for me. Overall, Evil Genius is fun to play with, but up to a point. For the positives, building your base up is fun, the game is full of character and personality, and the research system is pretty unique. Unfortunately, Evil Genius suffers from a surprisingly lack of replay value, repetitive gameplay, and poor AI behavior. It's a shame too, because the core that they have here is very strong. Elixir Studios was actually working on a sequel before they eventually had to close back in 2005. I'm curious what that original vision would have turned into, as we only have the 2021 sequel to go off of. The story of Evil Genius 2, however, is a story for another day. Thank you all for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.